In this episode, we will go deeper into patterns, change, and psychological safety.
And discover patterns to create lasting change.
Welcome to episode 28 of the Leading Complexity podcast. This is where we explore the art of leading organizations in a complex and hyper-competitive landscape. We do this together with some of the world's foremost thinkers within leadership. My name is Tomas Björkholm, and with me I have Göthe.
In this episode, we will continue to explore the work of Linda Rising. She's famous for the books Fearless Change, Patterns for Introducing New Ideas, and more Fearless Change, Strategies for Making Your Ideas Happen. Her work often explores how individuals and organizations can effectively implement change and innovate through the use of patterns, storytelling, and influencing strategies. You can listen to the interviews in episode 26 and 27.
Linda is referred to the Queen of Patterns. Michael, maybe you can explain what patterns are and how they are useful.
Yes, so patterns are things that we recognize can be kind of useful solutions to problems we experience. I think it's a human skill in general for everyone that we are, as humans, good at recognizing patterns. We can see patterns everywhere. And the concept of pattern recognition is also used in many different industries. For example, I know that Christoph Alexander coined that term also in architecture. There are patterns for how to design good architects. And also in software engineering, it has been taken up as a good way of writing good software code. And as a coach, also we talk about pattern language also in coaching. So here Linda brings it up also in working with change. And I think in general, it's very popular also among agilists and change leaders. So if we can identify different patterns, those are useful ways of addressing problems. And it's not like a one recipe or a predicted kind of one way to do things. But these are kind of ways that we see that it typically works. So we can use them, apply them, and we have to use some intelligence to kind of to adapt them to our circumstance. Linda is the co-author of Fearless Change. Thomas, you've read the book. What are some key points?
Yes, I have. And actually, the book is more or less a long list of patterns. It's almost 50 different patterns that you can use and be useful when you go for change. And just to mention a few, for instance, personal touch. That's the idea that you have a one-on-one conversation with some key stakeholders just to create a more personal relationship with the people and also give them room to express how they are thinking about the change you're about to lead. Another one is evangelist, and that's the idea of finding some passionate advocate for the change. And that person could be a good leader in telling what possibilities you have. And it's good that it's not you that are leading the change, that is this evangelist. Then you have someone else to also point at, kind of. Another one, for instance, is small success. The idea of having early victories, some small steps that you can later show. And that pattern is actually called the hometown story, where you can show that look at this change we made, and this is successful, and it's done here within our own organization, and that could make some skeptic people to actually listen in a little bit better. And talking about skeptical people, that could also be a good idea, and that pattern is called champion skeptic. So you just ask a skeptical person to be like, yeah, you be the skeptical one, and help us make sure that we're not doing this change for the wrong reasons, and be the one holding against, kind of, but being in the close area, like in the leadership team, as a skeptical one. Another pattern which is not mentioned here is called being the lawyer of the devil. I'm not sure that's the English name, by the way. You might be correcting me now. But the idea of being skeptical, and it's just your role. And the hope, of course, is to have the skeptical to be a little bit more interested in taking part of the change, and maybe even turning that person to become a little bit more optimistic about it, which of course will change a lot of other skeptical people.
Yeah, I recognize a lot of them. I think I've tried many of them. I didn't realize that maybe I was using a pattern, but
No, that's kind of the same feeling for me when I read the book.
yeah. So, for example, I think this one-on-one conversations, like it's in the dialogue, in the conversation where you learn, you develop, and you can get another perspective. Often we have a belief that if we just do a training presentation or like a one-way communication, we inflict change. But typically it's in the dialogue. So that one I really like.
And also personal relationship,
Yeah.
I would say.
Yeah, and of course sharing successes and really examples. Yes, yeah. The purpose of the patterns are to make change less hurtful. But why is change sometimes hurtful?
I think it's important to understand that each system have their winners and losers. So if a change is moving from one system to another system, making some change in how things are working, some behaviors at the organization, and here we can have some help from the SCARF model, which is coming from David Rock. I know it's at least presented in his book, Your Brain at Work, which I highly recommend, of course. He's talking about in the SCARF that are things that might be upsetting people. For instance, if you change the status, if you go on for uncertainty, if you hurt the autonomy, relatedness, and fairness, are typically change that could different things that could actually make people being less interested in making the change. And since we have those winners and losers, it might be that a person who feels like they are the winner in the earlier system, like they are the gurus within something, they're really good at the system, and then now we're talking about changing maybe some business system, and then they will become, well, new in the new one, not really understanding how it works, might be resisting that because they're going from being the guru on the old system and becoming the novice in the new one. And that, of course, could be hurting quite a lot. Certainty also, because you know how it works today. You know the system, you feel comfortable about it. And even though you might be thinking that the new one could have some good things in it, but just being uncertain what that would mean, that could be scary. And autonomy also, because if the change is coming from outside, it's quite a difference. And if you ask me about my tips about how to run change, I would say that is definitely something to look into. So please ask.
Yeah. So, but I think it kind of to summarize, her book is fearless, and but I think the things that you mentioned here, those are kind of based on our fears, right? That we are losing significance, status, and when we have some fear, that creates some defensiveness typically in us, and then we get rigid. We're not really solving problems or collaborating. So yeah, reducing fear, and that's the key. So yeah, if you're leading change, what are your best tips then?
Thank you for asking. Finally. Okay, I would say I learned something from a colleague of mine many, many years ago. He was saying that he does not like change, but he likes improvements. And working with him for some time, I learned that the difference between the change and improvement is where it comes from. If it was coming from himself, then it's an improvement. And if it's coming from someone else, it's just a change. So one way of putting it is make sure that it feels like people themselves are contributing and it's actually themselves coming up with what to do as a change. That I would say, then it will not be a resistance. It will rather be the other way around. People will will be very thankful for you driving what they feel as an improvement.
I like it, improvement versus change, yeah, depending on the perspective.
Yeah.
Something else that I really liked from also the interview there was the concept of taking step by step versus baby steps. And as I understood it, she changed it between the revisions of her book because the step by step was kind of sounded a bit like a linear process, like you're climbing a mountain, but that's not really how change happens. It's more of a learning process. And then taking baby steps, I think, is really good metaphor or way of thinking about learning. So as a baby, you're really just trying, and you fall down as you try to kind of take a step, but you're not really kind of blaming yourself or anyone, or you just try again and you keep trying, and eventually you're moving forward. So I think that learning process, so I think that was a kind of a good, really good pattern.
So what you mean is you're going from like crawling or lying still, and suddenly one day the baby is crawling, and suddenly one day the baby is standing up, and suddenly one day it's actually walking, and suddenly one day they are running. Is it like, so it's not linear, it's actually really steps.
Yeah, I think it's innate in people, humans, that we want to try new things, we want to learn, we want to explore, we pick up things, put things in the mouth as we're babies, and then we try things, and we're not really judging or blaming or think that we are failing when we're falling down. It's we're just in the learning, trying some new things all the time.
Yeah,
So
so two lessons in one, you can say.
yeah.
Yeah, good.
Also, Linda talked about if people fear repercussions, then they will kind of hide mistakes. Why is that an important concept?
Well, this comes into the idea of psychological safety, which became famous with the articles and books from Amy Edmondson. And she's talking about that it's so important in those complex times where a lot of change is happening that people can speak up. Because you can't rely on just a few people to recognize that the change is actually happening, especially if they feel proud about where they are. It could be hard to challenge yourself. So then it's very important to be able to feel, it's also for the leaders very safe to feel like if I'm getting too used to this, someone else will shout me out and just say, or call me out and say that, hey, wait a minute, I think what worked very well a couple of weeks before is not working very well now. So, and then it's important to build the environment, the feeling that if you do something like challenging status quo, or taking a risk by saying I heard something, or suggesting new ideas, for instance, you can't be punished for that. I would say not being embarrassed, not seen as negative. It's just thank you. That is the right answer to that, I would say.
Yeah, so I think learning is really the key, as we talked about with the baby steps. In change, it's complex. And when we are in the complex domain, we need to kind of learn to move forward. There's not one way to do things. And then you have to have a learning environment where people can be open, ask questions, challenge each other, and admit sometimes that I don't know or I need help, which is not easy if you're, yeah, typically you will hold back unless you have this psychological safety.
Yeah, and the opposite of that is more like a competitive environment where you want people, your employees, to compete against each other, because that has been a quite common idea at many workplaces, that this idea of up or out, like if you can't compete, and then you should just go out in a couple of years. So it's a big change for a lot of companies, I would say.
Yeah, I think it ties back. You talked about Dave Rock and the scarf model there. If you can emphasize status more than unnecessarily much, then there's this fear of losing status. So then this becomes this kind of political or competition as well.
Yeah.
So what can leaders do then to kind of foster this environmental psychological safety?
Well, um, at the class with Amy Edmondson, she was mentioning three things that we can work on as leaders. And she's saying, first of all, set the stage. Make everyone aware that we are living in a complex, fast-changing world. And in that world, we need all contribute with our thoughts and ideas. And so just ask for it. Say, I want you to be disruptive. I want you to come up with ideas. I want you to challenge my thoughts or whatever I'm saying. And also show that you are vulnerable as well. And just tell, I did this mistake, and that's very common. Everyone probably does that from time to time. So showing that you're vulnerable, but also asking for people to speak up is the first part, which she calls set the stage or set the framing. Secondly, she's talking about inviting participants and both widening and deepening, like asking, are there any other thoughts? Or maybe dividing people into groups and say, okay, now spend 5 minutes on trying to figure out what we have missed. There is a lot of ideas you can have on this. Just asking, let's say you're just about to have a release. I tried to just put up a big sheet of paper, and then I said, please come up with things that we have just forgotten to consider about this release. Secondly, deepening the discussion is when you hear someone telling something, instead of saying, I don't think that's a problem, rather ask for more information. Like, tell me more is a very simple word or phrase to use in those circumstances. The third one is to respond productively, because you can spend years on building up psychological safety by the first two, setting the stage and inviting participation. But then when the S hits the fan, it's all about how you respond. Because if you're responding with the feelings you probably have in that situation, that could be ruining the work you have been doing for a couple of years to build up the psychological safety. So then it's important to have in mind that this is actually what you've been asking for. People to speak up even when they fail. So when they make a mistake, they are open about it and they let you know about it. And it could be very hurtful for you as well to hear this. It might be that you are expecting something else, or you have promised your manager above you or your stakeholders a release, for instance, and then with just a few days left, you get the information that you will be delayed. And of course, that is not what you want to hear. But the truth is the truth, and you should be happy about it. So again, it's good to just be answering something easy that you really mean, which could, for instance, be, I'm happy that you gave me that information now and not later.
I have the experience of the opposite, where a CEO kind of lost his head, kind of shouted out like, they're destroying my company when an incident happened. And of course, nobody wanted to kind of bring forward the problems and kind of discuss it openly after that. So not much learning happening there then.
Yeah, and it probably take a long time to fix that.
Yeah.
Coming back again, yeah.
And I think these her suggestions are kind of generic advice, not only for creating psychological safety, but to lead in complex environments. You need to kind of set the stage, frame the problem as a learning opportunity, and then invite participation, because there's not one person with all the answers or have all the knowledge you need to kind of involve the crowd and get participation. So I think these are really good and broad advice for leading in complexity in general as well.
Definitely.
Okay, so to sum up, I think Linda talked a lot about the transparency, open dialogue, and creating trust. And those are not only nice to have, but kind of essentials for navigating the complexity and leading change. Okay, that was a great episode, I think. Interesting topics. So let's wrap up for today. We're curious about your reflections. So please share your comments and like the video and share it with colleagues and friends. And check out our other episodes at leadingcomplexity.com/podcast.
Thank you for listening.
Thanks.